Welcome to an amazing episode of Outside the Studio. This is Tessa coming at you with a very special guest, Kristen Helmstetter. She's going to talk to us about many different things, but I'm really excited to dive into her book, which has actually been out for some time. She's a self-published author, but recently it was picked up by a big publishing house. So congratulations on that, because the book did so well, Kristen.
Thank you.
And yeah, so the book is Coffee Self-Talk, which is also the name of your podcast, which I had the chance to dive into a little bit and I love, and I'll talk about why. But the book, Coffee Self-Talk, subtitle, 5 minutes a day to start living your magical life. If you want the revamped, updated version, it's on sale November 1st, or you can get the self-published version, which is available now. Kristen, how are you today? Welcome to the show.
I'm fabulous. Thank you for having me, Tessa. I love your name.
Oh, thank you.
That
It's
is
a
so cool,
name.
Tessa. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Backwards asset, which I always thought was cool, right?
Mic drop. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's a cool alliteration. Last name Tovar, so Tessa Tovar. Like, think about the alliteration of that. It's kind of a cool name.
It is.
I have a kitty. I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but she's a guest on the show quite frequently, but today she's deciding to sharpen her nails on the carpet behind me.
I can't hear it, but
really
okay.
fun. Okay, I'm glad you can't, because that means probably most other people can't either. So Kristen, I want to dive into your journey. It sounds to me like, from what I know from you so far, you've been on this journey, like all of us have through life, many different hats, many different careers. And what I think is interesting is how this book came into fruition. It sounds like it was kind of like a mid 40s or early 40s feeling like something was missing from your life. And then it sounds like you went on a soul searching journey with your family. You were traveling around, thought that might be the answer, but then really it was like this simple thing of just changing your morning routine, and which amounted to like 5 minutes, speaking to the subtitle, out of your day of just a new habit. Will you talk to me about that? I mean, I know that's like a million questions. One,
No, that's good.
Wherever you want to take it from there, please go ahead.
Okay. So you're right. I was in my early 40s, and on paper, my life looked really good. I worked from home. I would blog. I'm married to an amazing man. I have a daughter, and we just had, typical stresses. But in spite of considering myself an optimistic person, I woke up just way too many days feeling like I was sort of under a cloud, and I would let anxieties and stresses just kind of yank me around by my ponytail. And I just didn't feel any real purpose or sense of direction. So what do you do when that's the situation? You say to your husband, hey, let's sell it all and travel the world. And he goes, okay. So we did that. So fast forward a year later, and we're living in beautiful Italy, and I'm living La Dolce Vita on paper again, right? And I'm drinking the best espresso in these amazing cafes and ancient buildings that are like hundreds of years old, and there's cobblestone, and it's just amazing. And Tessa, I was still me. I was still waking up feeling kind of the same way. I was still looking at life the same way. I was still feeling this kind of anxiety simmering under my skin. And I had distracted myself by traveling and going to beautiful Italy, but I just still wasn't feeling this kind of magic, this kind of destiny that I thought was out there. So I was no stranger to self-help. And I knew that to change my life, I had to change my behavior. So one morning I'm sitting in my little tiny Italian kitchen, and I have my cup of coffee, and I thought, okay, I got to change my behaviors. Like, well, what are my behaviors? What's my first behavior? I get my coffee and I get on my laptop and I check email, or I get on my cell phone and I check social media, and none of which is ever uplifting, rarely uplifting, I should say. It tends to be reactive instead of proactive. And it certainly was not a beautiful way to start my morning. So I did something I'd never done before. I take my phone and I put it in airplane mode. I open up the notes application and I start writing positive self-talk and lines of affirmations about what I wanted to be, how I wanted to live, just aspirational things and uplifting affirmations like I am worthy of living a magical life, and I have an abundance of time, and I'm wealthy and healthy and happy. And some of the things were true in the moment, like I am kind and generous, but some of them were aspirational, but I was just writing them as if they were, as if, right? Like present tense. And there was like a sparkle. Like I felt some magic. I felt a brightness. I felt possibilities. And it was a dramatically different way to start my day. And then the rest of my day was great. And so it felt so magical that I started showing up to do every single day. And I started to have more sunshine and more sunshine in my life every day. So I was doing this for a few weeks. I wasn't telling anybody. I wasn't telling my husband. And he's kind of a night owl. So I would have my mornings to myself, and my daughter sleeps in too. So one morning he comes into, and I should say, my father-in-law is Shad Helmstetter, and he's like the father of self-talk. He's been on Oprah talking about self-talk. He's written books. And so I knew what self-talk was because my husband and I would have conversations about it. But and we were, like I said, positive thinkers, and we were optimistic, but I didn't have a strategy for how I used self-talk. And it turned out that pairing it with my coffee every morning was this way to show up every single day to do it. So back to my husband. So one morning I said to him, I do this thing, I was kind of embarrassed. I'm like, I call it coffee self-talk. And he was like, oh my God, that's awesome. You should write a book. So that's kind of like how the book came to be. But by showing up every day, it's like people say to you, exercise to get fit or reduce your stress with meditation. And I love that. I love meditation. But to meditate every day, it takes scheduling, and it can be so easy to not do it or to not stick with it. And by showing up to my morning with my coffee and this list of self-talk and affirmations meant I was doing it every day. So I was repeating it. And I started to believe everything I was saying. And that's when things really started to change. I started to show up to my life differently. I started to see problems as like opportunities, or they didn't freak me out. Or it's something as simple as like, if I would drop a jar of pickles and it broke, like maybe 5 years ago, I would have cussed and I would have been like, oh, that was so dumb of me. Or like, what was I, whatever. And now I'm like, oh, looks like I'm going to clean the floor. Well, the floor needed to be cleaned. I mean, it sounds so simple, but every little thing like that gets better and more sparkly, it like improves everything in your life. So that was how coffee self-talk came to be. And it became this epic journey of self-love, because what I realized in the end was that back when I was under that cloud and I was living in Arizona before we moved to Europe, I didn't feel worthy. And that's the craziest thing. And I often want to get all teary-eyed when I talk about it, because I realized through my self-talk, by just telling myself I'm worthy over and over and over, I started to believe it. And then I started to live it. And I started to boost my confidence and my self-esteem. And I started to see more opportunities and possibilities, and everything just got more magical. And it was just drinking coffee and saying some self-talk.
Yeah, I love that story. It's interesting. Well, okay. I want to ask you nitty-gritty detail questions about what that actually looks like. I mean, I'm imagining the subtitle of your book is 5 minutes, so I'm picturing like, here's how I would approach it. I would set myself a timer. I would make sure that when I get up, my phone was already in airplane mode so that I wouldn't have to even touch the phone to make sure that I didn't start scrolling, right? Like I would try to put bumpers on it as if I were bowling to make sure I didn't fail. So I'm curious if, as you were building up this habit, and it sounds like you already were familiar with practices like this, so perhaps this was an easier one to adopt. And I say easier lightly because that's such a relative experience, right? Especially when we think about building new habits that actually make a lasting change in our life. But I'd love to hear about how you stuck with this daily. What ways would you suggest fail proofing if someone were wanting to add this daily habit and behavior into their life?
Well, if you're a coffee drinker or a tea drinker or a kombucha drinker, whatever it is that you normally do in the morning, basically we're just pairing, we're taking this, we're habit stacking, right? We're pairing something that we already do every day so that it triggers like this reminder that we're going to add this new habit onto it. So for me, pairing it with my coffee meant I was going to show up, and it worked because first of all, like I said, you drink your coffee every day. So it's not like, oh, I need to meditate. I need to go sit in the corner and I need to no, I'm already drinking my coffee and I'm going to replace the habit I was doing on social media or checking email. And like, to your point, maybe you start off with your phone in airplane mode as a reminder, but the idea is that you know when it's coffee time and you're just drinking a cup of coffee. So you don't even have to set a timer for 5 minutes. You can just, it's about the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee, or 2 cups if you do it. And in coffee self-talk, I teach you how to write your own scripts. That's what I call them, like a list of affirmations. And I also include many scripts to get you going, and they're thematic. So there's abundance, there's health, there's one for parenting, there's even one on fertility. So if you had the book, you would get your cup of coffee and you could open the book and just read the script. And you're just reading it repeatedly as you drink your coffee until your coffee's done. If you write your own scripts like I did, I had them typed in my notes application in my phone, but a lot of people like to use handwritten journals. So it becomes a ritual that, because you connect, and that's why it works so well, is because you've connected it to this thing that you're already doing every day, like drinking your coffee. And it feels so good to start your day like this that you find yourself wanting to do it. And you start connecting it to even the ritual of brewing the coffee. It's like the pop of the K cup or the gurgle of the drip coffee maker becomes these cues that you've connected with your coffee self-talk, so much that, like, if you're walking in the smell, right, and the aroma and the taste, like, it all gets connected. Like if you're walking by a coffee shop, after you've got this routine going, this ritual, and you smell coffee, you start to think of your self-talk, and it becomes something that gets infused into all of your life as you change your self-talk, because that's really what the goal is to change our self-talk about ourselves and our lives. I think most of us have negative self-talk, and I think most of us have a lot of negative self-talk. Mm-hmm. And once you become aware of that, you start to find other times, like when you're just walking to the mailbox or at a stoplight, where you can constantly add more positive self-talk to your life. But it started with just this little pairing of your coffee with, like, sitting down in your kitchen and just going through some positive affirmations, just, like a little pep talk, with my coffee in the morning.
Yeah. I'm thinking about becoming aware, this idea of becoming aware of self-talk in general, before, like, prior to we even label it as positive or negative. I think you're right. I would agree with you that so many of us have a lot of negative self-talk, probably more than we even think we do. But I often think about, well, how do we even become aware of it in the first place? And then learn this ability of understanding or even catching ourselves in the moment when it is negative, and realizing how could we turn that negative into a positive, or even just kind of fact checking, well, is that even a true statement that I'm telling myself about myself, and kind of questioning the thoughts that we have. So I'm curious, and I know you've done a lot of self-help. I mean, it sounds like your father-in-law, kind of like the grandfather of positive affirmation. And are there other methods, other books you'd recommend people start with if they feel like, okay, well, what is this positive self-talk thing? And I mean, I think we can all kind of, like, we get it fundamentally, but if we're new to it and we're learning about how do we even know what positive or negative self-talk is and when I'm doing it, where would you recommend people start?
Well, I would start with sticky notes. I would, first of all, self-talk it's just the words and thoughts you think all day long. It's this inner dialogue. It's when you look in the mirror, it's, do you like what you see? It's, do you think you're funny or not? Do you think you're beautiful or not? Do you have confidence or not? It's how you look at something out the window and make a judgment, or it's your reactions to things. So it's just really what you're thinking about all day long when you're not necessarily focused on maybe writing an email or something, right? So it's just this constant inner dialogue. And once you know that, you start to pay attention to it, especially when you sit down with like your coffee self-talk and you are intentionally using positive self-talk. You naturally start to become aware of all the negative self-talk you have. I have so many people write to me saying, I had no idea it was so bad. I didn't know, I didn't realize that I was doing this to myself, that I was saying these negative things. I remember when I first started and I realized the importance of positive self-talk, I started paying attention, like I said, with sticky notes. So a sticky note can be on the bathroom and it can be on your desk and it can be on the dashboard of your car. And it simply says, like, for the first couple of days, pay attention to your self-talk. And I was amazed that, see, I used to have more positive than negative in general, but I still had a lot of negative. And you don't need any negative. You don't. I mean, maybe you make a mistake doing something and you think, oh, I should change that. Or even like, I'm not saying you can't ever have a negative thought, especially if you can use it to learn from. But in general, I think people, the biggest thing they do is they criticize themselves all the time. Their waistband feels tight, right? Or as they're aging, crow's feet or gray hair, all these little, it's like death of a thousand cuts, all these little tiny cuts of cutting yourself down. And simply just recognizing that with a sticky note to pay attention you're gonna quickly see how much negative self-talk you might have. And you replace it with something positive. We have one-track minds, essentially. And if we start to say or think something positive, there's really no room for something negative in that moment. Or if you are thinking something negative and you're like, I'll even snap my fingers sometimes. In the beginning, if I caught myself saying something, I would do something physical. I would say change, or I would clap. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but it works. It gets your attention. And then I immediately replace it with something positive. And you bring up a good point about like, well, what if I'm doing a fact check, right? Like, what if I don't believe it? So much of it, when you start, you might feel silly. I felt a little silly saying that I loved myself. I felt kind of silly. Now I think that's crazy to feel silly to say that. So if you keep showing up and you keep repeating it, you will start to believe it, even if you don't believe it in the beginning. For my mom, when she first started using positive self-talk, and I would tell her to do it in front of the mirror sometimes, which is really extra hard, she broke down crying. I mean, there's like the gamut of reactions. Sometimes what you say is inspiring. Sometimes it's flat out the truth in the moment. Like sometimes I tell people to start out with things that they know are true about themselves. Like, I'm kind. I'm like, I'm sure you're kind, or I'm generous, or something that you're good at, But then you start to build and you do start to say things like, I love myself so much, and you're looking in the mirror and you're smiling and you feel goofy sometimes and you fist bump yourself, but it does get easier and you do start to believe it. And so I always tell people, just keep showing up, keep repeating, and just watch the transition.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. I love the sticky note idea too, and keeping it simple in the beginning to just remind yourself to notice what you're noticing, to pay attention to what you're paying attention to. Yeah, I think that's super helpful. I'd also love to talk about throughout the day. I mean, I think of, I feel like I've heard so many different data points on this subject of how long it takes to build a habit that you want to stick, right? Like some people say it's 40 days, some people say it's 2 weeks, some people say it's 6 months, whatever. I'm curious about your journey, or what you've found, what feedback you've heard from readers about how long they had to really, I guess the way I'm thinking about this is like, if I were to start running, right? Like I'd never run before and I wanted to start running. The first 2 weeks, maybe the first month, is like an uphill struggle battle to make myself get out the door and go for a run. For you, it sounds like it might be a little bit different, but I'm curious what you've heard from readers about how long it takes to really let this ritual just be something that you look forward to and becomes this automatic thing you wouldn't even question. Of course, you're going to get up and have your coffee or tea, whatever it is, and have your self-talk?
Hmm. I think it varies for people, honestly. I think in general, you can count on something taking a few weeks. That's usually the rule of thumb. And it's what happens is after a few weeks of doing it, it's not that you suddenly, uh, what I've learned is that if you didn't do it after a few weeks, it would feel weird because you simply got used to it. So for some people, it's such a dramatic change in how they think that it's really interesting and they stick to it every day and they have results within a couple of weeks. I think with positive self talk, you feel it in the moment because it feels good to think and say nice things about yourself. And then you also feel it long term because you start to have changes in your life. You start to attract better things into your world. You start to do different things. You start to respond differently. You show up to your life differently. But it becomes so enjoyable that you feel the desire to do it every day. And then it becomes ingrained. It becomes your default way of thinking. So I still do it every morning because I just like starting my day like that. But nowadays, it's the way I think. So it's how I am throughout my whole day. It's how I am when I have my tea in the afternoon. It's how I am when I put my, head on the pillow at night. But if somebody really is desperate for change, I think it happens probably faster because your mindset is just so willing to grasp anything to make that change. And I think if somebody were like, well, I'm pretty happy, let me see if I can improve this a little bit. Maybe you notice the differences, after a month or something. But I think it's pretty standard that, I don't know, 2 to 5 weeks, you're going to really notice a difference.
Yeah. Well, and that you brought up a point that I wanted to touch on too, and that's throughout the day we start to see these changes in our lives. And oftentimes, I think when we think about things that are aspirational, let's say we want to make more money, we want to have the career of our dreams, we want to meet the love of our life. There's all of this kind of magic aspiration myth surrounding this idea of manifestation, right? So I think about the simple practice of something like this, and then how does that chain reaction affect your behavior throughout the day to create the desired outcome? Because I think the idea of manifestation here, which is kind of a different topic than what we're talking about, is starts with the seed of thought, but then it needs to be followed up with some sort of action, in my opinion, to create the desired outcome. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, and what is your opinion? What do you think about that?
I think it's a great topic, and I really enjoy the word manifesting. I use it all the time. I think you're right on. I don't think you can be what I call a couch manifester, right? Like you can't just sit on the couch and think all these positive thoughts and attract, into your life a bag of money. I'm open to it if it wants to happen,
Right.
but I think it's more likely you're going to manifest a great life if you do take some action. So the biggest thing that I have noticed is that when you change your self-talk, you're really changing your mindset. And when you change your mindset and you become more confident and your self-esteem gets boosted, you smile more. And I'm telling you, even going out into the world with a smile on your face more often is going to attract more opportunities and more people to you because they want what you've got. If you're at a networking event and you're smiling and somebody else has a sourpuss face on, and then there's somebody who wants to invest, they're going to come to you because they like the energy that you put off. So at its most basic level, you are happier and you're in a better mood more and you smile more. So that's one way I think about attracting opportunities. The other thing is your mindset is just focused on things that you want to accomplish. You feel, like I said, confident, like you want to do more things, and you start to expand the ideas you have, whether it's hobbies you want to take on, or if you think you want a new job. I have people who write to me and say that they use coffee self-talk to tackle fears. Like I have women, and this is plural, women who have written to me and said, I used coffee self-talk to drive again. because I used to be afraid to drive.
Mm.
And so you get this confidence is my point with it. And you do start to think of doing other things. So I'll tell you a story because you had mentioned writing. I've been publishing I've been self-publishing for many, many years. I used to do a lot of diet and health and wellness books. And I never thought I was creative. That just was not me. I mean, you would think as someone who cooks in the kitchen and stuff has creativity, but in my mindset, which is bad self-talk, I didn't think I was creative. So as an example, when my daughter was young and, she wants to play dolls, I was like a deer in headlights. I'm like, oh my God, she's looking to me to like build the story. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't know, Ken and Barbie, they go on a date. I don't know. Like I was like so bad. So I would push my husband into the room to do the dolls. And I would hear from the other room, he would have the dolls and they're forming corporations and there's mergers and acquisitions and ninjas and hiring and firing. And like, he was like, weaving in these lessons about business, like you hide spinach in a smoothie, right? And I would stand in the doorway with my jaw to the floor, like, my God, he's so creative. Like, that is not me. So I never thought I was creative, right? So I started doing my coffee self-talk years later, and I start to see all these benefits in my life. And I start to think, you're like, well, what do I want to do with this? Like, I want to try to do something new. I want to take some action. But I need to start with my mindset. So I just started, again, kind of sneaking in some affirmations. Like there are 3 of them. So I have this general script, like I love my life and I'm abundant, all that stuff, right? It's kind of general. I snuck in some lines. I am a creative genius. I am a prolific writer and I have stories to tell. Mm-hmm. And I was saying this in my coffee self-talk every morning with all my other affirmations for, I don't know, a few months, maybe. And the pandemic was kicking in at the time, and I'm in my mom's backyard in Arizona, and I had a story idea, like a novel idea, fiction. And I was so shocked because I didn't have story ideas. I turned around and I looked behind me. I'm like, where did that idea come from? I mean, it sounds silly, but I was shocked. And I had this book idea, and I was like, oh my God. Because I had thought, like, what if I could write fiction? So long story, not short, I ran with it. I started writing fiction books. I got a book on how to write fiction and I started studying it. And meanwhile, I kept my self-talk up that I was a creative genius. I was a prolific writer. I had tons of stories to tell. And I wrote a book, a novel, and then I wrote 8 more. So I wrote 8 romance novels in a year during the pandemic. From a woman who never thought, I wrote like 1 million words in a year. I never dreamed I would do that. But I started with my self-talk. I changed my mindset at how I looked at something that I thought, like, that would be cool to do. Can I? And then I took some action and I did it. So, I think I went off on a really long tangent there. Sorry, but
no, I love that. I want to hear more about these romance novels. I'm curious if they're a series or if they're independent of each other, or if the characters are different. I'm curious about the process. I have so many questions about. I'm an aspiring fiction writer myself,
Ooh.
And similar to you, I have all of this different but similar negative self-talk around that process. So tell me more.
Yeah. So once I got going, the words poured out of me. I kept thinking to myself, I have stories to tell. I have stories to tell. And it expanded my creativity. And I would fall asleep at night. And I would try to fall asleep at night, I should say. And I would think, oh, there's an idea. And I'd grab my phone off the nightstand and the light's blue light, and I'm like, typing in this idea. And then I would put it down. Oh, wait a minute. They could, So yes, there's a mix. Some of them are standalone romance novels and some of them are in a series. And I don't know, they're fun. They have heroines in them that are, overcoming, some trauma or, obstacles. It was really fun to write. And once I got going, my confidence stayed with it. and I self-publish all of those. It's a pen name. Brisa Star is is my pen name for romance books. So I don't know what else you want to know.
I want to know about your daily, if there is a daily writing process to churn out, did you say 8 novels in
Yeah.
2020?
hmm Yeah, actually I wrote it was almost a novel a month. I wrote a total of 10 romance books. We published 8 of them, and we published Coffee Self Talk. So it was 9 published, I think, in that one year.
Uh-huh.
And but I wrote 10. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So it
yeah,
was
nuts and
I
bolts, like what did your
yeah.
daily routine look like?
Um I I read a book. Oh gosh, I'll have to follow up with you what the name of the title was, but it really inspired someone who had no idea what she was doing. It's the guy who started NaNoWriMo. Do you know what NaNoWriMo is?
No, but I'm writing it down. NaNoWriMo.
NaNoWriMo is one word. It stands for Nano is National November,
Uh-huh.
Rimo, WRIMO, Writers Month.
Oh.
And the guy who started that, it was a challenge for people to write a book in the month of November, and it's every year. And people get on forums and stuff, and I think it works out to, you have to be like, it's like a 50,000 word novel, and it works out to be like 16 or 1700 words a day, which is really manageable. Like
Yeah.
that's not a lot.
Hmm.
So he wrote a book. I think the word plot is in the title, and I read it, and he made writing sound so easy that it was like it was just really encouraging. And I would recommend anybody read that book if they thought about writing and they didn't know where to begin. I mean, it's not going to necessarily tell you like how to develop characters, but it's going to give you the confidence to just sit your butt down and write 1,500 words a day. And it doesn't matter if you write repeated stuff. It doesn't matter if you write stuff that you delete later. It doesn't matter if you have plot holes. It just gets you going and gives you confidence to write. So I started with that, and I thought, okay, I can write, I think, 1,700 words a day. But what happened was I started writing thousands of words a day. Like sometimes it was 5,000, sometimes it was 9 or 10,000. And I was on a mission. I don't know. I was having so much fun. It was so interesting. It was so fun that I just showed up every day, every morning, and I just sat down and was writing. I learned in my process, probably like my second or third book, that I really like dictation.
Mm.
So I got a little digital voice recorder, and I downloaded Dragon software, which is not really good on a Mac, but you can get a virtual machine and then get like there's some workarounds. But I had a PC, and the software is really good on that. And that's dictation software. So I would have my little digital recorder in my hand, and I would dictate the books. And that, I don't know, that dramatically increased my ability to get words on the page.
Mhm.
And it was great because it meant I wasn't sitting all day. Because during my first book, I sat, most of the day. I was writing like 6 to 8 hours a day. I mean, I would take breaks, but I was writing a lot. I was thinking about my books a lot. Then in the evening, I would start reading more about how do you develop characters better, or how do you write scenes better. And then I was also reading fiction, because it's really important to read to keep that creativity going while you're writing as well. So I'm not going to lie, I was busy. I was waking up in the morning, doing my coffee self-talk, going on a walk, and then I sat down and my butt was in the chair and I was writing, or I was dictating and walking around, which is great about dictation, is you can walk around. But I loved it. I mean, it was so fun.
That's really cool. I love that. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the podcast, because that's something that I'm curious when that came to fruition along this journey. And also the format of your podcast I'm interested in, because I think there's so many, just like aspiring budding authors out there, so many aspiring budding podcast hosts. I hear all the time, I want to start a podcast. I have this idea for a podcast. And I think so many people are doing that now that it might feel like, to someone who hasn't started yet, oh, the market's saturated. What could I possibly say that hasn't already been said, I would say there is space for everyone. And even if someone's in the same genre saying the same similar thing, you're going to gravitate towards your voice and the person that you need to hear. So you have a voice and it's valid, and someone out there needs to hear it. But also, like the format of your podcast, I would love for you to talk about. So, will you first start by just telling us a little bit about your podcast, and then we can dive again into nuts and bolts of it?
Absolutely. Cool. So I started the podcast the first week of January of this year, so 2022. And I had already been selling coffee self-talk, and I had already had my romance novels out for, I don't know, many months, a year or so. I have a mastermind group with a couple of fellow self-published authors, and I had thought about doing a podcast, but like what you were just saying, I thought to myself, it's another thing to do. There's a learning curve. Who's going to edit it? And I should say, my husband edits my romance books. He edits a lot of my work. He's my copy editor, and he is kind of the mastermind behind my marketing and my book cover design and stuff like that. So I have this in-house support, which really helps. So I knew in the back of my mind that he could probably figure out what to do with the podcast. But most podcasts are longer form. Like this one, you and I talking, it's like an hour. And I thought, I don't know, maybe someday. So I'm talking to my girlfriends one day on this mastermind, and we're chatting. And my friend Tanya says, Kristen, you should do a podcast. And I'm like, I know, but like, how do you even do it? I mean, like, what software do you use? And she's like, there's this thing called Anchor, and just get online, look at Anchor. It's an app you can put on your phone, and you can just sit here and talk into your phone for your podcast. And I was like, that's a pretty easy entry level. And I thought, I'll just make my podcast like 5 to 10 minute episodes, which is what it is. It's once a week. I put them out on Sunday, and I try not to go over 10 minutes. It's usually just something that I want to talk about that has to do with magical living. It's, tips and tricks. It's how to deal with anxiety. It's parenting tips. It's just all the stuff that kind of surrounds coffee self-talk. So I looked at Anchor online. I download the app on my phone, and I recorded an episode. I was like, okay, let me try this. And I gave it to my husband, and I'm like, we need some music. We need an intro song. And so I have to be honest, it was kind of easy for me because I had him to like hand that off too. But you don't even have to do that level of it. Like, right? Like, just start with the app. It's Anchor. It's ANCOR. Just Google it, and you can put the app on your phone, and you can start recording. Because to your point, Tessa, you're so right. Everybody has a voice, and it doesn't matter if the market is saturated with a particular topic. Nobody will tell stories or things the way you do. Nobody has your experience, and the world needs your experience, and the world needs to hear about you. So go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I echo that. Echo. I mean, I think that we oftentimes get stuck in our head about this idea of, we have to have it fully baked. I have to know what my topic is. I have to have a title. I have to know how to edit it, how to, like you were saying, add music. But I'm telling you right now, you don't. You can just simply record it. What my idea was, I felt like I had so many amazing conversations with my friends. We would sit down and we'd have these epic conversations. And I was like, somebody else would want to hear this. Somebody else would glean some wisdom or lesson or learning from this. And it should be available for public consumption. And that was where the impetus came from, among other places. But that was one of the ways in which I was just like, I'm just going to record this and then I'll figure the rest out later.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. And I'm curious, the second nuts and bolts piece I wanted to ask you about is in terms of content curation. Do you ever like pre-order a list of things that you want to touch, or is it very ad hoc and you just kind of let whatever comes to you, whatever the topic du jour might be, just flow?
I have in my notes application on my phone, I have a podcast file because I will get an idea or something will happen in my life and I'll think, oh, this would be interesting to share on my podcast. So I will make a list. I probably have like 30 ideas right now, podcast topics. And sometimes I go in and I flesh out some details on one, but really just to not leave anything out. Like if I thought I wanted to talk about a book I had read, I might have a couple of bullet points just as reminders. But I typically like to do it free form. I like to show up authentically. I like to just be myself. If I flub, I flub. It's so much more relaxing for me if I don't have to be perfect and if I can feel free to make mistakes. And if I'll be like in the middle of recording and I'll be like totally silent for a minute while I think of what to say. And that's okay, because we're just going to cut that out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's very free form like that. And sometimes I'm itching to say something. And sometimes it's like, what should I talk about? Let me look at my list of topics.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and you mentioned life experience a little bit ago, and I wanted to touch on your background because it's really interesting to me the way that it sounds like you talked about health and wellness, and I believe that you were also a competitive bodybuilder for a period of time. And then in the corporate world, in the executive side of things, and a personal chef for a while, and now a best-selling author. So many different hats, like I said at the beginning when I was introducing you. Will you fill in the blanks there a little bit for us and tell us more about your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a competitive bodybuilder in my early 20s. So that was a while ago, but it instilled in me this motivation and this practice of healthy living and eating well and exercising. So I'm grateful that I started that at a young age. So I had that experience and I really got into diets and eating well as a result, which became a passion, which turned into a bit of an obsession, I'll be honest. So there's a little bit of a dark side to that, but just as a general 30,000 foot view, that was also around the time when I went into corporate executive positions in business. And it was when I met my husband, which was, I don't know, I guess about 15 years ago, when I wanted to go back and do something with health and food because it was really a passion / obsession of mine. So I went off on my own. I like jumped and the net appeared and I started, and this was back when self-publishing was really, really new. I self-published raw vegan books and started teaching classes at Whole Foods, and Wild Oats at the time was another one of the stores. So I jumped out of being, executive, and I thought, if I do it and it doesn't work, I can go back to doing something. I can find something else to do. Like I don't have to freak out if I fail. But it worked. The raw vegan books sold, and I started coaching and got into this realm of personal chef and food delivery. Like I was trying all these different things around healthy eating. And then I'm trying to think of the order of things. I was still doing that, and I was blogging, and the blog got pretty popular. So I had like affiliate ads on the blog to help make money, and I was still selling my own books. And then vegan stopped working for my family, and I had built up this business on being, Kristen's Raw, the raw vegan chef, who's talking about how amazing it is to be vegan and have raw food and makes a living selling raw vegan books. And my daughter was 2 years old at the time, and I was vegan through my pregnancy and breastfeeding and all that. And she wakes up one day and she can't walk. She can't walk straight. And it freaked me out. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? Am I missing some kind of nutrients? And it was this moment for me where I changed my dieting philosophy. So from there, I kind of just kept my blog going, but I came clean. Like I told on my blog, I'm like, here's what happened. And I can't promote the vegan diet anymore because it didn't work out for my family, and we supplemented and we did so many things right and it didn't work for us. So that was an interesting change in my life, to be relying on this income and then say that this didn't work out.
Mm.
So that was around the time, a couple of years later. So I'm blogging here and there. My husband's working from home. And that was kind of when I started to, like, I had this life where I was just kind of wondering, what do I do? You know, where's the direction? What's my purpose? What am I doing with my daughter? What am I doing every day? Like, that was when I started to wonder and feel like I was under a cloud more days. And that brings us up to that point where I started in the beginning of the podcast, where I thought, I need a change. I need to, let's sell it all and travel the world type thing. And realizing that it all really started with my mindset. I can be anywhere in the world. And if my mindset's in the right place, if my mindset's magical, then everything else is going to be better.
Wow, what a story. Oh my goodness. I can only imagine that journey from raw vegan to realizing it doesn't work for your family. And I'm curious what, if anything, how you're, what does healthy eating and healthy living look like to you now and your family? If you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about, like, I'm very passionate about health and wellness. I feel like I've tried every single diet under the sun. As a young girl, I struggled with weight gain and loss and body image, like so many of us do as teenagers and adolescents. And I just feel like probably in my 30s, my early 30s, I started to settle into, okay, this is my body and I love it. And my weight's going to fluctuate regardless of what I eat. I'm still going to love myself. So that's been such a journey. I think all health and wellness and nutrition is. And it's just so interesting to me, all the different fad diets that are out there, and basically having tried them all, learning what works for me isn't going to work for somebody else. I'm curious what your experience is today and what healthy eating looks like for you today.
Yeah, it was quite the journey. And I think you're amazing to have figured out a mindset in your 30s, back in your 30s, that supported just this kind of love of yourself. Because as I mentioned earlier, it became an obsession for me. And I went from vegan to paleo to carnivore. Like, I was trying all these different things. I had just a horrible body image, which kind of stemmed from bodybuilding. You know, you're competing on stage and your body is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Your clothes fit amazing. And you start to connect that with worthiness. And it impacted everything for me for a decade, or even more than a decade, where I was frantically trying different diets. And I had a stint with eating disorders. And it all stemmed from not feeling worthy, not loving myself the way I deserve to be loved. Which is why I'm so different now when I look back. And so today, how do I eat? It's kind of like you. It's like I'm really into just balance. I'm into not obsessing about it anymore. And it all comes from a foundation of loving myself and thinking positively about what I eat, and not freaking out and not stressing about it, because I used to so much. Oh my God, I would go to bed obsessing about it. And now it's more like, I don't know. I would say, oh, I don't eat refined sugar and stuff like that. But you know what? Sometimes I do. I mean, I have an overall healthy, I guess, eating. Like, I don't eat a lot of processed foods, but sometimes I eat processed foods, right? Like, it's kind of balance, and I just don't go overboard. And I'm very careful to not get obsessed. And I tell myself I love myself all the time. I look at my legs. They are not the same legs I had in my 20s. They are not the same legs I had in my 30s. And I tell them I love them. And I have these gushing moments of gratitude for my body the way it is, because I didn't do that before. And I feel like it was really harmful to myself to not love myself the way I am. So it's all kind of balanced when it comes to food. But the most important thing for me has been my mindset. And Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your honesty and for sharing that. And I think I ask that because it's important, I think, for me, I'll just start with myself and speak for myself to remember that. And when I say I've started to figure it out in my 30s, it's still a daily practice. I don't have it 100% dialed. But I can tell you for sure that it's more positive now than it used to be in my 20s when I would do the same thing, obsess about what I ate and how I looked and how my clothes fit. And that was like deeply attached to whether or not I was worthy of love. And and now it is not. It comes from within. And it's a constant daily reminder. And I think it's important because as we think about like the marketing of these new fad diets and we think, oh, we're going to try that because it worked for that person, they had great success, and look at them now, they look so beautiful and youthful, and X, Y, and Z malady changed. I think it's just important to remember that we're such bio individual people, and you could try new things, certainly be open to trying things, but remember to listen to yourself and how you feel when you do X, Y, and Z or eat X, Y, and Z, because you know your body better than anyone else. And that is a process too of learning to listen to your body and learning to know your body. So that's why I always ask that. Thank you for
Yeah,
your
I,
honesty.
I think I think when I look back on I would call it pretty severe dieting, raw vegan to carnivore even. I think it was a way for me to feel like I had control in my life because it was quite easy for me to control my food intake. I was really good at it. I had really good willpower in that sense. And I think I felt like my stress levels and my anxieties made me feel out of control. And so I relied on dieting to give me a sense of control so that I just felt better about my day. Like I felt like a sense of accomplishment. It's a strange mind thing, but when I started to finally love myself, to feel like I can show up as my authentic self, it was amazing how much easier it was to eat and look at foods and embrace different foods. It was like I didn't need that control anymore. So it's kind of a weird thing that I only really realized that in the past couple of years when I've reminisced on those times when I was really obsessed.
Yeah, and I mean, you need that perspective, right? To learn where you came from, to realize how you've grown. I think it's important to be able to reflect and
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge what you've learned. There's a couple of things that I want to make sure I get into the show notes. And one of them is your pen name for the romance novels. I think I caught Brista.
Brisa, Brisa,
Okay.
and then star with two R's.
Okay. Brisa Star. And then if we were to search NaNoWriMo, we might find the author of the book about learning to write fiction in a month.
Yes. I mean, can you still see me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So, yeah, it's nanowrimo.org.
Oh, cool.
Um, okay, I think his name might be Chris Beatty, Baty. And I'm going to go to Amazon real quick and type in his name. Oh, here we go. No Plot, No Problem. That's
Ah,
the name of the book by
okay,
Chris Beatty.
perfect.
Yeah, a low stress, high velocity guide to writing a novel in 30 days.
I love it. Okay, well, November 1st is when this new revamped coffee self-talk 5 minutes a day to start living your magical life is on sale. So
That's
what
true.
better day to start writing my new novel?
Awesome. I love it.
Oh, this is the serendipity magic right here. I love it. Kristen, is there anything
Yes.
else you want to share? Anything we didn't cover?
No, I just want everybody to know that they are worthy. That's my biggest message, self-love and worthiness. And you start to build that and whew, life changes.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your message and your experience and your many different avenues of exploration with us. I so appreciate your time. And one final question, where can people go to find, what's the best way to connect with you if we want to find out more?
I would say the quickest way is either to email me at Kristen@KristenHelmstetter.com or to find me on Instagram under Coffee Self Talk. And if you message me there, that's a good way to get a hold of me.
Very good. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our time together. It's been such a pleasure. Everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't, be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.